So, good evening or good afternoon. Sorry it's so warm today. In case anyone doesn't notice, I'm actually from Scotland. So I'm actually working with Chef. So I'm going to take you through a journey that I did with my previous company. So not necessarily with Chef, but with the company I was working with and how I implemented Chef. So for those of you who don't know, Chef is a configuration management program. It's becoming more than that now, but it's effectively a configuration management program. I should try and turn on my clicker, look a bit more professional, possibly. So effectively, the whole idea is it's all about the journey. So the journey with Chef, probably about 4.5, 5 years ago, I started looking at Chef and many other configuration management components. There are not many configuration management systems that were available 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm going to take you through the journey, how things happened, where I came from, the tools I looked at, the kind of issues we had with the team, and some of the problems we have just building a pipeline. So however you look at this, you're building a pipeline. You might call it a production line. You might call it dev test production environment. However you want to call that particular thing, you are building a pipeline in the end. Okay, so that's not working. So this is the Kon-Tiki. I was actually over in Oslo, so this sums up exactly where I was in my journey. A little bit lost. It was definitely a rickety boat, and I wasn't really sure where I was going. I really didn't have any buy-in. I definitely didn't have any clear plan. I attended a Ruby course in the Pragmatic Programmers in Silicon Valley in the US. They were using Capistrano for deployment. I never heard of Capistrano before, ever in my life, so I've been a sysadmin for probably about 15 years. Developers started actually deploying in 2010, and I couldn't believe, why would a developer deploy? That's my job. I work in operations. What the hell are developers doing? So it was really annoying, and I was really fearing for my job at that point, and I could see the future where developers were doing my job. So yeah. So if there's any developers, could you please leave the room now? So I played around with it a lot. I looked at Chef, kind of thought, yeah, it's okay, do I use it? So I chose Chef, and then about a month I spent looking at Chef thinking, not really sure, doubting my choice. Right, so really at this point, this is the kind of mountain I thought I was actually climbing. So this is where I thought I was in my journey. I had to get to the top of the mountain. I was at the base of the mountain. What do I actually do to get to where I want to go? So the key thing here is you have to choose your tools wisely. I'd obviously chosen Chef at the time, and disclaimer, I now work for Chef. So that's one of these things in life. I never planned it that way. We chose Subversion for source control, and we chose Subversion. Subversion is really not that great. It's okay, it's what we had. And a month after playing around with Chef and Ruby, in the Ruby world, everyone uses Git. So I kept converting everything, checking things out of Git, converting them to Subversion. And that was really non-value add for the business. So basically I switched to Git just because when you use Ruby, the fact you're using Ruby and the fact you're using Chef's written in Ruby, then you start using Git because the whole Ruby world uses Git, right? And if you want to go against the flow, you're really trying to swim upstream, right? So the tools you choose can dictate some of what you do. Turns out Git was really a good choice, right? So Git was a good choice for version control. All the workflow became easier, and I had developers who wanted to stay with Subversion, but they switched to Git, and now I actually have a developer who came up just about 2 months ago and thanked me so much for making him switch to Git. He's been using Git ever since, and he's been converting developers across to Git ever since that horrible day when we decided to switch. So sometimes it works out well. We started upgrading Chef. We wait 2 weeks when Chef comes out. 2 weeks later, we upgraded Dev. Then a week later, we upgrade Test. Then we upgrade Production. Right, and we're continually upgrading. So a continuous upgrade cycle. At the time, Chef was fast-moving, fast-paced. It's now also still fast-moving, still fast-paced. It's moving. Bug fixes happen a lot. So the key thing is not to stick with really old software. And how I look at really old software is if you have a problem and you Google for it and you find 400,000 answers, right, you're using a really old version, right? when you Google for it and you find no answers, you've either done something really wrong or you're using the latest version, right? You want to find no answers in Google because that means you're at the latest version. And all the other bugs that you're not finding, you're not having, is because you're on the latest version and you're not finding the bugs that have been fixed. We chose Jenkins. So Jenkins we used Jenkins a lot. We built Java, we're using WebLogic, we're using Oracle. We built a lot of Jenkins, right? We built all our jar files, all our war files with Jenkins. It never really occurred to us to actually use Jenkins for actually deploying infrastructure, right? Just never occurred to us. We'd used it for years, and we started using Git. We'd used Subversion for years. It never occurred to us to actually check all our scripts from Bash into Git or into Subversion. Just never occurred to us. And once we started using Chef, we realised, check everything into Git. And then we realised, hang on, this is not that great actually working with this Chef tool. Why don't we have a workflow tool? And we're sitting with developers and they're saying, well, we use Jenkins for our continuous integration. That's a kind of workflow. Can you use that? And we're like, no, that's a developer tool. We never use those. So really, about a month later, we're sitting there thinking, Jenkins, yeah, that could actually fix a few problems. So that's how we ended up in Jenkins. We basically refused to use Jenkins, and then we thought, yeah, Jenkins is a great idea. And then it was our idea to use Jenkins for infrastructure. So fantastic idea. So the key thing is about choose your tools wisely. I work for a Chef. There's lots of tools you can choose. There's lots of different sizes. Different tools do different things. But just be aware when you choose certain tools, it dictates the other tools you use. I realised quickly that basically I couldn't do Chef on my own. So we actually recruited another Chef guy. Then we recruited a second Chef guy, right? And this is really a big thing where suddenly I'd implemented Chef 10 and then the new guy came in and he wanted to implement Chef 10 and a half, right? So he implemented Chef 10 and a half and suddenly what I owned disappeared and now what he owned was there, right? So there's a little bit of an ownership thing there. So we had some tense moments where my Chef server disappeared. So it wasn't good at some points. We then actually, we did a really massive cookbook, right? Really the biggest cookbook we could do. It took us about 6 months and we never really got to the end of it. We did a massive project and we realized that do the small applications, do small pieces, right? So we broke everything into small chunks and we started doing, if we can automate that in 2 days, let's do it and let's put it into production. Right, so we learned a big lesson there. Don't do a 6-month project. Don't do something massive. Don't do your SAP project, right? Do a little bit of Apache, a little bit of IIS. And a key thing here is pair with a Chef expert, with a domain expert, right? So if you're going to do an Oracle cookbook, take a Chef person and take an Oracle domain expert, right? Always have a domain expert. He knows the domain better, or he or she knows the domain better than anyone else does. Chef people do not know Oracle that well. They do not know JBoss that well. Some of them do, but please don't just have a Chef person do Oracle or do JBoss or do SAP. You need your SAP expert. So train and educate, a really important thing is always try and train the people you're with, both in terms of Chef and also in terms of DevOps and also culture. So Ford Motor Company have this thing about not DevOps, but culture will eat strategy for breakfast, right? So it's not about the great strategy you have for your fantastic new web startup. It's all about the culture you're building in that environment so you can achieve your strategy. So it's all about building the correct environment to allow the people you have with you to grow and come in the journey. So again, it's a journey. And the journey for us took somewhere around about 4.5 years to actually go through the entire DevOps movement and straight into deploying direct to production. Contaminate other teams, so try and encourage one of your team members to go into another team, just contaminate the teams. Also we try to do demos every week or every month. If you can try and do that, it's something we were very, very bad at. Doing demos for the whole company, it's a fantastic thing to actually do. So, caution, danger ahead. Right, so we're going to talk about the dev test production issue. So historically, I built dev, someone else built test, and then someone else built production. And dev would always break in a different way to the way test did, and test would break in a different way to the way production did. And the real problems with all of that is that we're not building from one centralized scripting repository, right? That was a real problem we had. And the problem we had was contractors coming and going. So the key thing is that if you use a tool like configuration management tool like Chef, you can actually build in one centralized repository. You build dev, you fix all the problems in dev in this single script. You then move that script builds test. So all the problems you had in dev, you don't have any of those in test. You fix all those problems in test. You don't have any of those problems in production because all the problems have been fixed in the script. The script builds the environment, right? And then a nice side effect, all your institutional knowledge is suddenly inside those scripts. So if all your contractors and developers disappear overnight, all the information's inside those scripts. So you're saving your institutional knowledge inside those scripts. A really nice side effect. So this is kind of where we were going halfway through our project. We weren't really sure which direction to go in, where we're going to go to. And really, the solution to all of this, where are we going, is to put workflow in the pipeline, right? So we started using Jenkins really, really heavily. So Jenkins we used, and we have this kind of rule that Jenkins can talk to Chef, but no one else can. So no human beings were allowed to talk to the Chef server. Only Jenkins could actually talk to the Chef server. So basically, you had to be in the workflow to allow the workflow tool to actually talk to Chef, to talk to Git, to check things out, to check things back in, to deploy infrastructure, right? The key thing about that is you have a log, you have logs inside Jenkins, you have logs inside Chef, you have a complete audit and compliance path, right? No one can change your infrastructure, no one can SSH into a server anymore. Of course, you have a break fix in case you have to do that in an emergency, but effectively, Jenkins became our workflow tool and our user interface, and we gave that, surprisingly, to the business. So we said to the business, hey, you edit business rules, why don't you actually have access to Git, change the business rules in an XML file, it's actually text, you can read it, change it, check it back in, tag it, and then go into the Jenkins interface and deploy it, right? There's no reason for operations to actually be in that loop. So that's the kind of things we started doing, so business people could actually deploy to production. If they chose to do so, they didn't have to do so. So this is us, we're on a journey, we're taking off, we're over the mountains, and we're heading home. So this is the kind of timeline graph, so we're nearly finished. I've got about 10 seconds. So this is where we started from. We started from developers deploying Ruby apps, went all the way through to choosing smaller chunks, using workflow tools, and we end up at this place where you can have a single button to deploy your applications or your updates, whatever it happens to be. So the end game process, as we see it, is you need an intelligent editor of all your properties files. You need someone to actually activate the business button, and you need your deployed apps to be available as a service. That's fundamentally it. That's what the future holds. That's where we're going to be. You still need the intelligent people to write the scripts in the background, but fundamentally, we're going to be in a world of push-button IT. That's where we're heading from. No one's going to manage individual servers. It's going to be push-button IT. So that's pretty much me.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.